Welcome, policymakers and intelligence analysts, to today's explainer. Now, we're framing this session as a high-stakes, purely objective intelligence briefing. Today, we're looking at a very specific and, frankly, very urgent risk assessment: the nuclear proliferation dangers that would literally immediately follow an Iranian regime collapse. So, just to be clear, this isn't some theoretical tabletop exercise. We're looking at the hard data and the stark realities on the ground right now.
Okay, let's dive right into this. We're going to do a precise, methodical deconstruction of the threat vectors here. First up, we'll audit the nuclear threat inventory. Second, we'll look at the chain of command. Third, the crucial Iran versus Iraq distinction. Fourth, we'll wargame 3 scenarios of chaos. And finally, we'll wrap up with the existential risk. All right, Section 1, the nuclear threat inventory. Basically, the bottom line up front. We need to establish the raw physical reality of the threat before we even touch the geopolitics.
200 plus. I want to anchor our briefing today with this absolutely undeniable figure. That number represents the kilograms of 60% highly enriched uranium currently sitting inside Iran. So this isn't a projection or guess. That is the actual inventory. Now, what's truly concerning here is the sheer scale of the apparatus surrounding that uranium. Yes, we've got the 200 plus kilograms of 60% enriched material, but we also have centrifuge components at multiple facilities, and get this, some of those haven't been tracked by the IAEA since 2021. Add to that the whole shebang of a workforce, thousands of highly trained nuclear scientists and engineers. This inventory right here, this represents the loose nukes problem, shifting from a theoretical whiteboard scenario into a waking nightmare for intelligence agencies around the globe. Moving on to Section 2, the chain of command. We know what materials are there, but who's holding the keys right now?
Currently, all of this is under the control of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Now, whatever else you might say about the IRGC, you have to acknowledge that they are a strictly hierarchical, disciplined organization. As of today, they are the custodians. Their disciplined hierarchy is literally the primary force maintaining physical security over Iran's nuclear materials. They're the ones keeping it locked down.
But here's where the threat assessment flashes red. Regime collapse isn't a clean event. It's not a switch you just flip. It is a deeply chaotic process. If the regime fragments and the IRGC fractures, the security forces split, you get competing factions, you get provincial commanders making entirely autonomous decisions, the chain of command just totally dissolves, and in that absolute chaos, these highly sensitive nuclear materials are suddenly left completely vulnerable. Section 3, the Iran versus Iraq distinction. For the decision makers tuning in, we need to shatter any historical complacency regarding regime change in the Middle East. Past performance is absolutely not indicative of future results here. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why. When regimes fell in Iraq and Libya, they simply didn't possess nuclear materials or advanced programs at the time of collapse. Contrast that directly with Iran. They currently possess weapons quantities, 60% enriched uranium, and the advanced scientific expertise to actually use it. So the core takeaway, regime change without a rock-solid plan to secure materials in Iran is without a doubt the most dangerous non-proliferation gamble in human history. The historical parallels just don't apply because Iran actually has the inventory.
All right, Section 4, 3 scenarios of chaos. Let's wargame the specific threat vectors that emerge during a chaotic collapse.
We're going to preview 3 terrifying micro-stories of how these materials, or even just the knowledge to build them, could leak out onto the black market or fall straight into the hands of non-state actors: the rogue commander, the scientist diaspora, and lost tracking. Scenario 1 is the bargaining chip. Just imagine a rogue IRGC provincial commander suddenly finding himself in possession of a nuclear facility. He could easily decide to use that material as a massive piece of leverage. He might attempt to trade it to the US for personal amnesty, or far worse, he could just sell it to the highest bidder on the open black market. Black market enriched uranium is the ultimate nightmare scenario for literally every intelligence agency on Earth. Scenario 2 is what we call the AQ-Con pattern. See, it's not just about the physical uranium, it's about the brain trust. Knowledge doesn't stay put when institutions completely collapse. If the regime falls, thousands of nuclear scientists might flee the country, creating this vast diaspora. They could offer their highly specialized expertise to other states or non-state actors. This perfectly replicates the notorious proliferation network run by Pakistani scientist AQ-Con for decades. An Iranian scientist diaspora could easily spark a whole new wave of global proliferation. Then we have Scenario 3, which is perhaps the most operationally frustrating: the breakdown of tracking. Let's walk through this timeline real quick. In 2021, the IAEA already lost tracking on some centrifuge components. Fast forward to 2025, Iran officially notifies the IAEA of its intention to invoke special measures to move materials to undeclared sites in the event of an attack, basically as a survival measure. So if materials are dispersed and tracking is lost right before the government completely falls, the post-collapse inventory would be entirely incomplete and untraceable. We simply wouldn't know where to look.
Now you might be sitting there wondering, well, doesn't the US have a contingency plan for exactly this? And yes, we do. It's called the Mobile Uranium Facility. It's highly specialized equipment designed specifically to secure materials in these exact scenarios. But there's a massive catch.
The intelligence assessment here is incredibly stark. Deploying it requires ground access, security forces, and cooperation that wouldn't exist in a chaotic collapse. So the crucial point is that this high-tech mitigation plan is entirely useless without a willing, functioning partner on the ground to grant us access. And in a chaotic regime collapse, that partner simply does not exist. Finally, Section 5, the existential risk. We need to wrap up by looking at the strategic implications of exactly how this regime might fall. We have to impartially contrast the two potential futures here. On the one hand, a controlled transition. If there's a negotiated handover or an organized transition of power, the nuclear materials can potentially be secured. But on the other hand, we have a chaotic collapse. Internal collapse, military fragmentation, civil conflict. If that happens, those advanced nuclear materials drop into a world with absolutely no custodian. I want to be perfectly clear with the defense planners viewing this today. A lack of a custodian for over 200 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, this is not a policy risk. It is an existential risk. So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought to really question your baseline assumptions. If the regime falls tomorrow, who holds the keys? Thanks so much for joining this intelligence briefing.